So what we're going to do here is go through the tune Lulu Swing. Okay, so let's check it out. Here we go. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is take a look at the chords. So the chords of the song include a D major. I'm using a D major 6/9, an E7 or an E9, and then an E minor 7, followed by, I'm using an A13 here, back to the D, and then for the turnaround, I'm going up a minor third, back down chromatic, starts this over again, to the next chord. Okay, that was the A section. Play A in terms of the form, and then we're going into the B section, so I'm going to add a D7 here. Now we're in the B section, and it's G major, G sharp diminished, back to the D major, and then we go to the E7 or E9, and then back to the E minor 7 to the A13 or A7. And the same thing now, we return to the A section, then to the next chord, which is the E9, E7, whatever. One more of these. And then we have the turnaround here. Excuse me. So, now let's try that in tempo. And by the way, all of these chords are on the PDF chart that you can download if you look at the link below. So let's play through that on the chord progression. And I will play moderately. So it has an intro, by the way. And the intro is D to an A7 sharp 5. You can have any intro you want. That's the one I'm familiar with. And then the song begins. So it's like this. Let's try with the intro though. Break. Ba-da-da, ba-da-da, ba-da-da. That's pretty much it there. Now you could have played along with me, but you don't have to. We'll do that a little bit later on where you play the melody and I will play the chords for you. And then we can work that around the other way where I will play the melody and you play the chords. And we'll get into that. So now, if you looked at the chord shapes to see what they are that I've recommended, then we can get into the aspect of what the melody is. Now, the melody is based basically on the chords, and it has a little flavor to it. Flavor meaning that it has some interesting little melodic pickup notes. That's the pickup notes. That's based on your pentatonic scale. Those of you know the major pentatonic scale or major blues pentatonic scale. So the pickup notes are A, B, D, and then the downbeat note is. And that note there, F sharp. Okay, and of course this is tabbed out as well, so you can, again, look down there for the tab on the melody. That's the D chord there. And here's the E. That's where the E comes in. Notice there's only one note difference there. So you're just going down from the A to the A flat. And then, excuse me. And then you're on that chord. And then you're going to, you would normally be this. So you would think. And I played, that's a break, okay, for the melody line. Some people use that break, some people do not. But at that point you would break, because if you're playing the chords and you're going like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, you would break. And then there is an actual guitar line on the original that goes. But that could be anything. You could play anything over that you want. That just happens to be one of the versions of this song. So you're just doing a double stop here, as they call it. You're on the 7th fret, down to the 5th fret, grammatically, down to the 3rd fret, and then finally down to the 1st fret. And then the whole thing starts over. And we're going to go to the G. Now, this actually, this section is basically open. Open meaning it's open to any interpretation you like. Now we're back to the A section. So over the B section, the melody is open, meaning that you could play what you'd like. So on this part, I would be playing one thing, but you could play whatever you want. We have a, I'm going to be playing that, which is a G major 7 arpeggio, but I'm doing it in swing style, swing rhythm. That's over the G. You can, now this is all tabbed out. You can just check it out. Then I'm going. Or, so you might have this. Now what was that second part? That was a G sharp diminished arpeggio. 4-note one. G sharp. There's the B, there's a D, and there's an F there. So we went ba-da-ba-da-ba-da. Now we're back to the D. So if I went like this, now what did I do there? I did another arpeggio, which was, but I descended. Okay. I believe I did a trill there. So that was a descending from the 3rd of the D major arpeggio to the D. Okay. And that was a B. And the A. And then when I went, hammer on pull off. This is the 3rd to the 4th of the D major arpeggio to the root D, and then I added the flat 7. The reason for that is because at that point we have a D7 chord. If you so choose to include it, it could be left out. It wouldn't really make anything. It wouldn't really matter on the rhythm because you've implied that as on your melody. So okay, so now we go to the to the E7, E9, and at that point I'm using a little thing that Django uses. It's a nice little line there. In fact, it almost sounds melodic, like a song. And what am I doing there? There I am playing off of the E7 chord. I'm going E, E flat. Or since this song is in D, it's a sharp key, so I would call that a D sharp, E, D sharp. And then from there, I'm going to the third of the E7, which is a G sharp. I'm going G sharp, G, G sharp. Then I'm moving up to the fifth of the E7, which is a B. I'm going B, B, B flat, B, and then high E. So it's okay, and then I'm going to descend from there. Almost like Frosty the Snowman. And now we were on the A7. That note is simply E, D, C sharp, B, sorry, and A. And there's that A7 sharp 5 that I'm using. And then we're back to the last A. Play anything again, like I said, in that little space, you know. Could be just whatever you make up there on that. So basically, that is your standard melody to Lulu Swing, and those are the chords. And now, let's take a look at something that we might be able to solo with. So on this chord, the D, there are so many avenues of approach here. In my school of thought, I break it down into basically 5 or 6 categories in my thinking. I approach it from different angles. So, for example, over a chord type, I would think, what's the scale source? What's the parental scale source? So this is in the key of D, so D major. So obviously a D major scale works, right? So it's pretty simple. You know, I do that to dominant, sorry. You can play it anywhere you want. Along the neck that you know where that scale is, you could use the scale as a scalar approach. Now, what are you going to do with the scale, right? Well, there are I'd say at least 3 or 4 different ways you can bust up the scale and make it more interesting. You can use the scale in a sense of sequence patterns, which could be considered a completely different approach method, and that would be as simply taking a cluster of notes and repeating those in a sequence. Now, an obvious sequence that you've probably heard a million times over is something like that kind of thing, you know. So any of these things could be considered a sequence. I find those kind of boring to do too much, you know. It might be okay might be all right for a little while. You could use a sequence like so what I'm doing there is going to the third of the D major scale, root, and then to the 6th of the scale, then to the 2nd or the 9th. So now some people will call that a lick. It is a lick if you continue to repeat it over and over and over. Alright, so there's that concept. You can also think of intervals and use things in, since we have 7 intervals in a scale, we could have 7 different intervals, and then if you permutate them or use them in an inverted sort of way, then you would have 14 of those. But let's say it would take a simple one like major thirds. So everybody's heard that, right? So you could actually use that. And you could do the same thing on the E7. Now by doing that, you have to keep in mind though that you have to know that you have a E7 here and not just a regular major. So the note that changed there is the 7th. So you have to think of the E chord as a dominant 7th chord, because that's what it is. You have to think of it as a temporary dominant 7th scale. Now that gets into the idea of analyzing the chords in the song. And since we have a regular D major going to a E7, the E7 is not part of the D major scale, the chords that are harmonized from the D major scale, because normally it would be a minor. So whenever you have a dominant taking the place of the minor, let me go back for just a second. And for those of you who do not know, the chords from the D major scale would be a D major or D major 7, E minor 7, correct? And then F sharp minor or A sharp minor 7. We have a G major or G major 7. And we have the A7. Okay. And then on the B, we have a B minor 7 or B minor. And then we have the last chord, which would be a C sharp, and that would be a C sharp minor 7 flat 5 back to a D major. Now, the 3 minor chords from that key were E minor, an F sharp minor, and a B minor. Now, we're using an E7, so that means that one note in that E minor chord has been changed. And whenever you change any of these minor chords that are in a key, okay, and by the way, let's give them numbers in a major scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 1 again. When you have the 2, the 3, and the 6, those numbers, being minor chords, can be changed into dominant chords. Okay, there's rules on that as well. But that's called secondary dominant, okay? It's a secondary chord because it's not normally used. But it is secondary and it's dominant. So this chord here, E7, functions as a secondary dominant chord. And then finally that chord resolves to its minor, regular minor, diatonic minor, then goes to the 5 chord and back to the 1. So when you end up going to the E7, you must keep in mind that we now have changed one note. And that one note moves from a D sharp to a normal D. So we would have E, F sharp, G sharp, right? That's the third of the E7. And then we'd have the A, the B, and now that note right there. This is the D, sorry. Okay, you can hear that. You can hear that. So keep that in mind when you're thinking of something to solo over on that E7 chord in terms of a scale source. It would be the same thing if you broke that down into intervals. Well, no matter what those intervals are, you could do, you know, it makes no difference. You have to think in terms of that scale. So, having said that, let's move on to the next chord, which would be obviously the 2 chord. So if it's a 2 chord, it's E minor, of course, right? I just played a little bit of a arpeggio there, but I just meant to play the scale itself. And then the A7. And what is that? Well, that's just the D major scale starting from the A. See what I'm doing there? So that you just have to think on your starting point there. Now, that's called a mixolydian mode or scale. It's a mode because it belongs to the parental scale source. Okay? That's not set up in isolation. But anyway, that is your basic concepts in terms of the scales. And the same thing when you went to the bridge and we went a G there, we'd have a G major scale, which is basically the 4th mode of D major. So the 4th mode of D major, obviously, is Lydian. We don't have to worry about these big names. Just remember which note you start on. It's the same exact set of notes, just started from a different point. No, don't get into all the heavy theory on this, unless you enjoy that. Okay, and then we go to a G sharp diminished. Now here, when you're doing this, we have a half-whole diminished scale here. I believe that sounds better. Let's see, as a half-whole diminished rather than a whole half. Now you won't have time to play all that whole scale because you're going only on 2 beats. 1, 2, 3, or 4 beats, sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you don't always have to play the scale. Just take a couple of notes from it. You know, one of the things that's really good to know is when you play a half-whole diminished scale here. Starting on G, the next note, the G sharp, and then you're up on it's the A sharp, and then now you're on the B. This is all you really need. This is not super important in terms of getting those notes in there. It's just this one note, or the notes in the chord. And if you notice the note in the chord of the G sharp diminished, it's only one note is different than just having a G7. So if you took any dominant chord, okay, and you raise the root, you'd have the diminished. Now in this song, it's a regular G major to the G sharp diminished. So if you're thinking of where does this fit in, where did this come from, there are 4 inversions of this chord, and you can use them in minor thirds along the neck. So if we were going down here, we've got the F diminished, I should say diminished 7 I'm using. Oh, and then we go up to a B, we could go up to a D, F again. So any of these inversions actually are functional in this song. And so this, it doesn't matter whether you played, after you play this one. See, I could move around like, if I wanted to. The only thing that's changing in your ear is the bass note there. So the D is on the top. So it doesn't really make any difference. But just be in sync with the bass player. If you're playing with a bass player, agree on which one you're going to use ahead of time. It would sound better. And then we're back to the D D major again. So obviously there was that. We're talking now about scalar sources, and then we go to the E again. It's the same thing for there. Same thing there. Now the thing you want to keep in mind is that you can condense all of these things, these ideas, in terms of the scales and so forth. You can condense all of these things to the parental scale source. As long as the chords that you're using that are within the chord progression are all of the same key, then you don't really have to change your notes at all. You don't have to think a bunch of different, you don't have to jump around from, oh, here I gotta do Ionian, and here I gotta do, I gotta do Dorian, and then I gotta go Aeolian, then I gotta go Mixolydian, I have to do, you don't have to think about that. You only look at the notes that have been changed because of a chord being changed. So in our song here in the A section, you could use the D major scale all the way through that, Anything you want to use there, I added a couple of notes that were not in the scale, by the way. If you got that, you're good. So, but you can use any of these. And just remember, when the note changes, it'll be because the chord tone in another chord changes. So that's the thing you would keep in mind. Now then, that's enough said about the scales or modes. Another idea, of course, is what we all love to play, well, at least most of us do, is arpeggios. So obviously, we can do the same application with the arpeggios. So we'd have a D major, a major arpeggio or a major seventh arpeggio, even a major sixth arpeggio. The same thing on this. We go to the E7. Now that one, you would have a dominant seventh arpeggio. And by the way, while I'm on the dominant arpeggio, let's take into consideration, a lot of you probably know your pentatonics like crazy, You know the minor pentatonic, and you know that if you have a minor pentatonic, it also works for a major pentatonic. So for example, we're on E7 here. Now, you say, well, what am I going to do there? One thing you can do is, if you know how pentatonics are inverted, you could say that you have a dominant pentatonic here. What's the dominant pentatonic? Well, in this case, it's E, F sharp, and that would be a G sharp, a B, and then a D. I played that a little bit wrong. Okay, so you could look at that and say, well, wait a minute, that's when I analyze it, that's a dominant 9 pentatonic. Or, a dominant 9 arpeggio. So what are you telling me? Are you telling me to play a pentatonic, or are you telling me to play an arpeggio? Well, here's where the arpeggios kind of cross over a little bit into that pentatonic. Because you could have... I played that one note bad, so don't copy me on that. I had this, and I added this note. There's the flat third. So what I really did was... See that? Flat third, regular third. I moved into it. So I added a note there. So if you were to look at this in another way, like from the dominant... you don't have to have the minor third in there. You can play it like that. That's just a dominant pentatonic. So there's 3 different major pentatonics, or I shouldn't say 3 major. I should say 2 major and 1 dominant pentatonic, which are nothing more than inversions of the minor pentatonic. What? What is he talking about? Okay. Well, let's use something that's really simple. Let's go back to something that you probably already learned. Let's change the key and say we're in the key of C. And we played a major pentatonic, which was C, D, E, G, right? those notes, if you start from the A, hear that? That's basically a minor pentatonic because they're sharing the same notes. You started the minor one would start on A and the major one starts on C. Same set of 5 notes, just depends on the starting point. But the way you look at those in the key that you might be in, so if we were in the key of C temporarily, just using this as the example, we'll get back to the other later, then where's that 5 come in? Where is that coming in at? Well, it'd be the same thing if you understood the chords that belong to the scale. So if you are in the key of C, the 5 chord is G. So we go, that's the G major pentatonic. I said major, excuse me, I said major pentatonic. It could be, but you could make it a dominant 7th pentatonic, or a dominant pentatonic to be exact, instead of messing up like I seem to be doing verbally. Okay, so that's where that came from if you're looking at it. Okay, so you're basically starting on the 5th of the C major idea and moving from G to A to the B to the D, right? And then we're going to make the flat 7, which is the F, and then to G. So the same principle works here. Going back to our song, the E7 can be that. So some people would look at that as a dominant 9 pentatonic or a dominant 9 arpeggio. Okay. If you added that blues note, then you are playing major pentatonic, major blues pentatonic to be exact, technically correct. But as the arpeggios are concerned, I would just simply just think of the arpeggio itself. Okay? Now, keep in mind that once you play a dominant arpeggio, you can also use a diminished arpeggio under the guise of a functioning dominant 7th that's going to go someplace else. In this case, we're going to E minor. So before this regular G sharp becomes a G, so in other words, from regular going from an E major to an E minor, you can think in terms of the temporary insertion of a diminished. So what would that sound like? So if we're on this, we're going what did I do there? Try it again, watch. What did I do there? I played the diminished arpeggio a half step above the E. So I started on F. And remember, the diminished arpeggio works as minor thirds, intervals. That is how you would think if you're on a dominant 7th chord. Now remember, these are secondary dominants, and not a regular dominant 7th that is static. That would be natural. No alterations in it. So any secondary dominant could be considered an altered dominant, even if it isn't. Like, for example, if we changed the E7 to a E7 sharp 9 or an E7 flat 9. Okay, so that gives you the sound like something's really tension and it's going to move. So we already had this, right? So we have an arpeggio there, and then we could have regular. If you want it to sound very melodic, you could use the regular arpeggio. If you wanted to stay a little bit outside, create some more tension, it's going to want to resolve in just a moment, because you are going to resolve to the minor chord. So if I was on this note, let's try this right here. As we said, we have the D major, then we have the E7, and instead of using the E7, I'm using that diminished arpeggio up a half step from the E. Well, that note right there is going to resolve. It's going to resolve to what? Well, it's going to resolve to the minor, because I'm going to a minor chord next. Well, what's the third of the minor chord? I happen to be on this note right here. The G natural is the third of the E minor. The G sharp is the regular third of the E7. So what I have done, and then I can go, and now I'm on the E minor. See, I can come down. Voice leading is what I kind of subtly was hinting at, but we should talk about voice leading in another section, because that can get confusing right now in this context. So basically, you can have the dominant or mixed leading scale. Remember, you're not going to be able to get all of these notes in. I guess you could play super fast and try to get them in, but that's just running scales up and down. You want to kind of make a melodic statement out of that. And then if you want to sound outside, now we have that. And then we have an A7 arpeggio. And like I said, this is the third of the E, right? Going into this goes into the E minor to the to the D major. Now the same thing would apply on our bridge. We could have a G major 7, or a G major. Sorry about that. Some people like to do on these fingerings, if you're paying attention. So I'm doing this, or I might be doing this. Some people like to play this 3-note thing with the arpeggios from a system that they've learned. It's kind of like I don't know why. You use whichever system you want. I'm just talking about the note here, or the concept, the approach methods technically. So on the approach methods. So on the G, we're playing a G major there. Okay. Also, we could have actually you could do a pentatonic there. Back to the, and then we go back to the E again, and back to the E minor. So there really isn't anything that's really different. So you have three things that are actually really only two things that step outside the key when you're playing these chords. That steps outside the key because it's a secondary dominant. That's not. That's not. And the walk downs or the turnarounds don't count in terms of being worried about them. What are you going to play over those? We can treat those separately, okay? Treat turnarounds and intros as a separate concept and a different topic here. So when you go back to that chord and you're going to move into the B section, that gives you the D7 chord there. Now that's when you have a functioning dominant seventh that's changing the key. Functioning means it's going to go someplace to a brand new key, and obviously a 5 chord functioning dominant seventh goes to its root, which would be G. So it's 5, 1, but it's temporary 5. Temporary 5 and 1 where it's going to stay. Now the 1 is relative to the 5, which is the D7. But someone will say, well, wait a minute. The G chord here is the 4 chord of D major, and it is. But as soon as you turn the D major into a D7, then it wants to go home, and its home base is always 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 away from its root. Okay, circle of fifths, circle of fourths, those concepts that maybe you have already explored, and you can do that, I recommend, at some point. And so now you're on the G. Now at that point, you could still think of G major. So, and then you can go up to the diminished, of course that's what's in the song. And we're back to the same D major again. So on your arpeggios, what do we've got? We've got stock arpeggios from the roots, obviously the D major, right? We have it E7. You really don't have time too much to play with that. That's 2 beats there. So you really don't want to, try to, I got to get all those notes in. Think of the essential notes. What I did there is descend from the G, which is the minor third of the E minor, to the A7. And so if you look at that as a A7 arpeggio, I'm starting it on the 7th of on the G, which is the 7th of the A7, but it also functions as, you can hear that, right? As part of the E minor. Okay? It also functions in terms of substitute arpeggios. I should probably parenthetically insert this point into the mix of arpeggios. So take a look at the A7 chord here. And if the substitute for that is the 7th chord of the key, which in this case is C sharp minor 7 flat 5. Starting the arpeggio from the 3rd of the chord, that gives us the minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio. Hey, what about starting it from the 5th? Wow, that's a E minor arpeggio, E minor 7. Okay, right there is the note I should have played. I put this other one note in there, which made it the 6, which you could do E minor 6. So my mistake, I was playing E minor 6, but E minor 7 would be the theoretically accurate one. Okay, so that's starting a minor arpeggio from the 5th of the chord. And then from the 7th of the chord, that right there is G, and that's a G major, or a G major 7. So what do we have here? Inside this A7 chord, which is really cool, I think, you have 3 other arps that you could use. So in order to remember what they are, you have to think of this A7 as the 5 chord from the key, and think of the root of the chord, which is A, and then remember what the note of the chords are, and give them the numbers. A, this is like a 1, there's the 3, there's the 5, and there's a flat 7. So that means you could start an arpeggio on the root, on the 3rd, on the 5th, or on the flat 7. And although each one of these notes are all in the same arpeggio and all in the same scale, the only thing you have to remember is your starting point. Okay, so gives you an arpeggio there, which has 3 other substitutes for it. But that's getting into dominant seventh chords and arpeggio applications and stuff. That can get really fun, but it can be tricky. So all I'm saying for you to think about is that you don't have to start that arpeggio on on the root every time. So let me review this just for a second there, in case I've confused you. If you know what the chords are of the scale, you know the function, which means the 1 can be substituted with the 3 or a 6. Okay? The 2 chord can be substituted with the 4 chord. Okay? The 5 chord can be substituted with the 7 chord. And they swap. So that's why you have so many different variations on that. So moving outside of the arpeggios, let's see. The next idea, I've already mentioned this briefly, but the pentatonics. So basically you're already dealing with major and minor pentatonics. And obviously the major pentatonics start from the root of the chord that you're on. And if it's a dominant seventh, it has to be a dominant arpeggio. Dominant pentatonic. And if it's a minor chord, minor pentatonic, or move it up to its relative major and play that. So again, those are substitution principles for that you could use. Then we were talking about intervals, how to play intervals. So if you're playing over the chord, you don't have to play all the intervals, everything. You just play what you know of the intervals. You know, maybe you know harmonic intervals. What are harmonic intervals? Well, there might be like that kind of thing. Some people like to nickname that double stops, but it's really just harmonic intervals. You're playing intervals, but playing them at the same time, so they sound like they're harmonically accurate. They harmonize. So you could try playing intervals of the chord of each chord, like that. You know. I was on a G there. You can play it in the D. Any of the chords will work. So think about harmonic intervals as well, and playing intervals. Let's see if I left anything out. Well, triads would be, I would say, an abbreviated version of four-note arpeggios. So basically, G major there. You could always do that. You could always think of and try to you could try to think of triads in the chords themselves and triad inversions, which is what I just played there. I was playing it on G. So, but you can do that with any of the chords, right? The D major, you know. Don't play them as a chord. Play them individually and mix them up, and try to create a nice little line or something that you can use over that. So basically, we have talked about scales, modes, okay, talk about arpeggios, we can talk about triads, which are simply the three notes of the arpeggios that are four-note arpeggios, and we can use inversions of those triads. For example, in the D, we have a lot of different things you can do. If you want to sit down and melodically think about how to put those triads into action, you know. We also have the sequence patterns, you know, like I mentioned before. I would consider something like an enclosure pretty much like a sequence pattern, although, you know, we don't necessarily refer to them as that. Just like on this, right? Like on the D, you could have something like that. Or that would be more accurate. Okay, an enclosure. In other words, I'm taking each note of the chord. Okay, regular D major, and I'm enclosing it. And there's four different ways to enclose that, from above and below, or a combination from either direction. Here I went a whole step above and then a half step below. Then I jumped to the fifth, and I was going to do that. So I started with the a whole step above, half step below. Okay, same thing here. And then when this one is a half step above, because it's the third. Now you said, why would I do that? Well, first of all, here's all you have to know about enclosures, is that you're using the scale source, but you're targeting the notes that make up that chord. Okay? And you have to approach it using one of the scale tones. So if the scale tone above is a whole step, you use that. If the scale tone above is a half step, you'll use that. Same thing, it works like that. So, you know, you can hear that's probably a real hallmark of Django. Or even that right there went. I did a hammer on, pull off, slide, then back up to here. Hammer on. So you can do that a lot. All these things work not only as embellishments, but they work as a great idea for things that you can put over the top of your chords, moving you through the chord progression. So we talked about those things, and the only thing I left out here was chromatics. So chromatics is where it spices up everything. I think it makes it sound cool or hip. You would call it that from musical perspective. This is hip. So, for example, if I was playing let's say I was playing a D major arpeggio, I went. I used a couple of notes there that weren't in the scale, did I not? How about this? Or pickup note. That's an enclosure. How about this? Same thing, but I used a half step there. But I make, for example, okay, that was just a line, and it was using an arpeggio with chromatics. There was your chromatic. That was the chord tone. There's your chromatic to a chord tone. Or as I recall, there is lots of things you can do, even on any of these chords, like any of the concepts, I call them approach methods, that you're already using. Once you get those under your fingers, you can add chromatic notes to that. Obviously, chromatic notes are simply notes that are not of the scale or of the chord that you're on. But remember this, when you use them, the way that you use them is 99% of the time on a weak beat. So in other words, if you have, let's say you had this arpeggio, okay, 1 and 2 and, or just 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if we turn that into eighth notes, we have something in between each one of those. I think you have to let your ear be the judge of what sounds good to you, but you're adding something in between the beat, the strong beats. Okay, since this is 4/4 time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So think of it like that. So if you're already using something, no matter what it is, of those methods, and you want to add the chromaticism, make sure the chromatics work with the beats. It won't sound good if it doesn't fit into that. So you have the stronger beats. A more exact rule would be that we have in swing, the emphasis is on 2 and 4, not necessarily on 1 and 3. But if you're playing a chord tone, the strong chord tones, therefore in a swing would be on the 2 and the 4. So what are the strong chord tones? It's the 3rd or the 7th, followed by the root or the 5th. So anything else could be tossed in into connecting those scale tones and or chord tones. Okay, so let's play the chords here. I'm going to play the chords for you, and you can play the melody. Here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and intro. And then we would have an outro. Okay, if you made it through all this video, then I appreciate your attendance. And if you have any questions on what we've talked about, then please feel free to email me, and I will respond to you, okay? And you can also find the link to the gypsyjazzlessons.com website below, and you can email me from there, or any other way that you can find me, okay? I'm on Facebook as well. So let me know what you thought of the lesson, and if you have suggestions for future lessons, okay? All right, thanks a lot, and take care.